Well, we're going to go around the room, make introductions, just briefly. I'm going to ask if we want to approve meeting minutes from February and April now, or do we want to move it towards the end of the meeting? It's up to the members here. And then Joe Gowers is going to respond to some of the questions regarding OU2 remedial design. We're going to review the timeline document. We're also going to talk about potential technical assistance requests, where the CAG members might want additional work done by SKIO for technical review, and a discussion on the project website and repository materials. So with that, do we want to start?
Yeah, and I would just suggest we wait on the minutes till Vivian's here.
Vivian is,
I can't make it tonight. She's sick.
Okay.
I just talked to her.
Okay, yeah, because she sometimes does those comments.
Yes,
She has comments on that. Okay.
okay.
Robin Canetti, Ringwood resident and CAG member, I don't know, for about 6-7 years.
I'm Gretchen Samarco, also a Ringwood resident. And I'm going to take this moment to just make a quick announcement. Yeah, I heard from Judith Zalikoff today from NYU, and their group is ready to, they're going to have a town hall meeting at the Church of the Good Shepherd sometime later this month or in April, where they're going to present their, where they're going to present their data. And I think it'll be very fascinating to be able to hear this, their data on blood work and water.
And you think
The
it's
samples they took.
the end of the month?
She said either the end of the month or the first part of
And as we
June.
find out about that, will that be sent out?
Yes, we'll send out a
Okay. Judy Talbot, I'm with the University of Virginia Institute for Environmental Negotiation. We're assisting with facilitation and the new phase of work being done by the CAG. We assisted with the community involvement plan last year and doing a little more support now.
Lisa Chan, I'm a Ringwood resident. Thank Toll, Ringwood resident, former mayor, and on the CAG since the beginning.
Go ahead.
I'm Peter Sando, Ringwood resident. Joe Gowers, EPA project manager for the site.
Joe Siegel, I run the Environmental Collaboration and Conflict Resolution Program at EPA Region 2.
So he's a facilitator with EPA that works within that agency.
Yeah, Pat Seshi, Community Liaison, EPA.
Tom White, Oakland resident.
Scott Heck, Borough Manager and resident. John Spear, Ringwood Mayor.
Colleen Ladab, the project manager from Ford Motor Company.
Gary DePippo, Cornerstone Environmental Group.
Matt Grubb, the Maximus.
All right.
Are you
Well,
taking the minutes tonight? Are you taking the minutes tonight?
Yes, over on the computer.
Oh, okay,
It's
good.
recording, yeah.
Okay, you're a new face.
Yeah.
I'm just filling in for Craig.
I figured. Thank you.
The automated assistant doesn't need coffee breaks or lunch, so this goes. With that, then, do we want to move ahead and approve the meeting minutes from February and April? Here are, just a refresher, here are the minutes from February. I believe that these have been circulated earlier and that no comments were received, Pat, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, reading the other.
Okay.
Make a motion to approve.
Approved, okay.
Second.
Okay. February minutes approved. I have some extra copies if anybody is interested in the minutes from the February meeting. And then the Thursday meeting, the April meeting. Here's these. Lisa, did you have some suggestions or cleanup on these?
No, that's the letters.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And likewise, extra copies of the April meeting notes. And later, we're going to be discussing where to provide materials from the presentations, handouts for the CAG meetings, where they should be housed. Previously, there was a website that contained a lot of materials, and Pat's going to talk about some of the options that they have on different EPA websites for Superfund. Give everybody a chance to look at them. Ready to approve them?
Yeah.
Or would you like a minute
Sure.
to- Okay, we'll give a minute to look that over.
No, I'll move the minutes if we're ready.
You ready? Good? Okay. And so with that, the previous minutes for February and April meetings are approved. Joe, do you want to go through the responses to the questions?
Can you stand up over there?
Sure. That'd be great. Or have a seat, depends on how long the day has been, you know.
Yeah, I guess the last time we heard from the Test Contractor on the review of the RD report, and they had provided certain comments and recommendations for EPA to consider, and you passed those comments on to us. I'm just going to go through each of those comments and provide what responses I have to each of those comments. The first comment was that the CAG may want to ask EPA to consider whether higher arsenic concentrations found in 3 of the test pits that were installed during the pre-design investigation in the Peters Mine pit area need like further exploration south because of the higher levels of arsenic. And again, basically the way that the pre-design investigation test pits were installed, they were there to try to delineate the extent of the waste material. So they worked where the waste material was, or fill material, outward until it was clean. A sample was then grabbed out where essentially there was no waste material. Basically, there was within each of these pits there was also mine tailings which were found, and we all know that there's been issues with the mine tailings also having some elevated levels of arsenic in them also. So basically, where they were grabbed, there was no waste. So I mean, at this point, if we had seen other contaminants of concern at the site, like lead or benzene or something along those lines, which are clearly associated with paint sludge, we might say, yeah, we might need to do a little bit further investigation. But here, because we had tailings mixed in and it was only arsenic, we don't believe that there's really a need to go any further in terms of sort of defining that southern extent of the pit area. The next question was, the CAG may want to ask EPA for if any revisions can be made to the remedial design to further reduce the potential for migration of contaminants into groundwater and surface water. Can we make the cover thicker or less permeable? And again, and we've discussed this in the past, that there were investigations conducted in both the O'Connor disposal area and in the Peters Mine pit area, where samples were collected for 1,4-dioxane. We didn't find any source of 1,4-dioxane in these fill materials during these investigations. Also, the highest levels of 1,4-dioxane are being found in the water at the bottom of the Peters Mine pit, and it looks like there may be a source Peters Mine, the air shaft. There might be a source somewhere in that air shaft there. And because of these reasons, we don't believe that there needs to be any sort of modification to the selected cap to make it impermeable at this point in time, because there's really no source, there doesn't appear to be any source that's been found that's leaching contaminants to groundwater, 1,4-dioxane in this area. So we don't believe that we have to go back and sort of reevaluate or revise the cap to make it less permeable, because again, you would do that if you had maybe some sort of source there, that you found some source that was leaching contaminants. We're not seeing that. And even the Test Contractor had even indicated in their comments that there was no evidence of some sort of large source leaching to the groundwater.
From above? I
Yeah.
mean, that would be the only reason to put a different cap, because you would be thinking it would be coming
It would be coming from, like,
Yeah.
if you had something leaching from the fill material above the water line, above the water table there, then you might think of, putting something impermeable in, but in this case, we're not seeing that based upon the investigations that have been conducted there. We didn't find any, we put, it was like 20 borings in and didn't find any 1,4-dioxane, a source of 1,4-dioxane in the fill material. And for those reasons, we still think the remedy that was selected, the permeable cap, is appropriate for that area.
Right. Well, there's no way that you can protect the groundwater with the cap anyway, so, right?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the Pismire Pit area, the fill material is already in the groundwater.
Yeah.
It's basically, a lot of the fill material is below
Right,
the water table.
right, so.
So it's not going to have a significant impact on those materials, if there was anything leaching there off of those materials.
But materials in the O'Connor landfill, there's a lot of lead and arsenic there, right? Benzene.
Lead and arsenic in...
Benzene in.
Well, we're not seeing an arsenic or a lead plume coming off of the
No, but
O'Connor
in
disposal
the
area.
waste there.
Well, there was paint
Paint
sludge
sludge,
in
yeah.
there, so
Which-
if there's any paint sludge still left in there, there could be materials with some elevated levels of lead in them
Right.
because lead is elevated in the paint sludge.
Yeah. yeah.
So, yeah.
It's not like the,
But again,
waste in
what we're
O'Connor
seeing-
is clean, it's full of toxic stuff.
Well, there's clearly we're capping it because there's material there. We don't want people coming in contact with.
Correct.
We're assuming there's still some chunks or whatever of paint sludge probably present in the O'Connor disposal area, and that's why it's being capped. But we're not seeing a groundwater contaminant plume coming off of lead or arsenic coming off the O'Connor disposal area.
So what you're talking about, Joe, is whether, and protection from different types of pathways. So you
Yes.
have physical contamination, you want to avoid physical contact, you're looking to eliminate that pathway with the cap.
That's correct. We're basically any sort of dermal contact, essentially, with any of the materials that could be there.
And then knowing that there are contaminated materials in the site, the question is there anything else that needs to be done regarding pathways for groundwater? And there's multiple levels of contaminants, some of which are already below groundwater tables, correct? Is that what you said?
Well, there's fill material.
Fill materials,
in the Peters-Mine Pit area is actually below the water table.
And then these, there just doesn't seem to be a pathway from the materials to the groundwater.
Well, basically what we're seeing is we're not seeing any sort of significant impact from those materials to the groundwater.
Okay. So it's about pathways and level of potential impact.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
The next question was that the CAG may want to ask for more information about the planned work, specifically referencing the Catamine Pit cul-de-sac area at the end of Van Dunk Lane, and basically details about more details about how that's going to be handled would be provided in, I guess, the next document that would be generated, which would be the remedial action work plan. Once a remedial action contractor is selected, they then take the ARC, this remedial design report, and then have to expand upon that in what's known as a remedial action work plan, sort of flesh out more details, and that's where you're going to find more details on what's going to be done and the timeline for work at that cul-de-sac. However, the design report does clearly provide for there to be a temporary cul-de-sac constructed, as well as a temporary driveway constructed for the resident at the end of Van Dunk Lane to permit access and to try to minimize any sort of disruption to their access of the property. The CAG may want to.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Details at 11.
Yeah, no, and you're going to hear a lot of these. That's why a lot of the questions and things that we're missing is because they don't generally show up in the RD report. They show up in the RA work plan that's developed by the actual contractor who's going to do the cleanup. CAG may want to ask EPA whether the location of the detention basin near Park Brook and the planned discharge of stormwater from the basin could cause redistribution of contaminants possibly into Park Brook. And I think we touched upon this the last time, that, you know, the sediment basin that's going to be constructed in the O'Connor disposal area, the intent of that is to try to minimize runoff of materials from the site, the runoff of the soils during work. And the way those are designed is that basically, you know, the materials would run into them, and then there's like a holding time. It holds the materials for a long enough time that the sediment settles out before the water is slowly discharged at the other end. So the intent of the basin is to try to essentially address the concern that's being raised by the task contractor about materials running off into the Park Brook.
Right, because that's an issue during the construction.
Yeah, and you know, and all this, you know, anything like this, I mean, it gets approved, a plan is developed, and that plan goes to the local soil conservation district for basically certification and approval. And that's what happened in this case also.
What happens to the sediment? That
Well, it goes into that
it stays there?
it stays in that sediment basin.
It
It's
stays
keeping the
there.
material. You're keeping the material on site. Yeah.
Does it
And
ever have to be removed at any point?
Does the
Sediment, does it ever build up so that it would have to be taken out, or the basin is big enough to?
well, the basin, it's a large basin,
Yeah.
but I assume if there was any need for removal of materials, it would just be, you know, put under the, you know, during the work, it would be put under the cap.
What keeps people from touching that? The cap's the protection to keep people from touching what's on the O'Connor landfill. What protection is there to keep people from wandering into wherever the sediment lands?
You mean during the work or
After.
after? Well, after the work, there's going to be a plan to convert that sediment basin. It's going to be turned into essentially a detention basin because of the recycling center. Once the recycling center is constructed on top of that cap, that's going to have impermeable surfaces which are going to limit the percolation of material, of water down.
So the detention basin will end up under the cap as well? In the cycle?
You mean the sediment basin? The
Yeah.
sediment basin is ultimately going to be converted into a detention basin.
And
And
would
there'll
that
be
be
more
within the
detail.
fence? Like, would that be within the fence? of the
It would be,
recycling center?
yeah, it would be within the fenced-in area, too.
So it is incorporated into the recycling center?
It's going to, yes, that area is going to be converted into a detention basin. So, I mean, that's not going to, I mean, again, because of the additional stormwater runoff that would be expected because you're putting impermeable surfaces in for construction of the recycling center, that would be required that they account for that, and that's how they're accounting for it with the construction of the detention basin.
Thank you.
Okay, we want to ask EPA for additional details about the performance standards for each excavation. Will the contractor remove any visible waste? Will the contractor take confirmatory soil samples? And here again, there was a pre-designed investigation conducted to sort of fill in the data gaps to help define the extent of materials that need to be put under the cap. So that's already been conducted. So we don't feel the need, there's going to be really a need to do any additional post-excavation samples. And to point out, for instance, in the Catamine pit area, any scraping of soils, there's very little overburden, there's very little soil there in the Catamine pit area. We would like to be down to the bedrock, the shallow bedrock, so you wouldn't need post-excavation samples. In the Peters Mine pit area, we know we're going down to the water table, so we don't need to take post-excavation samples beneath that to determine where to stop. We know we're already stopping at the water table. And in the O'Connor disposal area, you know, the areas that are not going to be under the cap are going to be scraped back down to mine tailings. Again, we don't need to do any delineation. We know we're going to be stopping at the mine tailings, and then soils would be put over that, topsoil, and that would be revegetated. So because of that, we really don't think there's a need at this point in time for there to be any additional, like, post-excavation samples conducted as part of the activities there.
Post-excavation samples is sampling of
It's really
the exposed soils? Like,
Well-
so for example, if you excavate, post-excavation, you have what's exposed and then you have what's been excavated.
Yeah, it'll be the exposed soils. It's basically, and it's usually used to determine when to stop. But in this case, a lot of the when to stop has already been defined because of the shallow rock in the Canamite pit area, because of the water table in the Peters mine pit area, and because of the mine tailings that we already defined as far as we're going in the O'Connor disposal area. And for those reasons, we don't see a need at this time for post-excavation sampling.
So you're not going to be testing the mine tailings?
Well, I mean, if we're digging up materials and we're considering reusing them somewhere, then they would have to be tested. The materials would have to be tested. If, for instance, they wanted to dig up materials from the O'Connor disposal area, test it to see whether it's hazardous. If it's non-hazardous, they can then use it as fill in Peters mine pit under the cap. That's when you would need to test.
Let me see if I understand it. So when you get to the mine tailings, that's when you're going to put the soil on top of those mine tailings?
In the shallow, in basically the low-lying areas, yeah. It would be basically scraped down to the debris-free mine tailings, and that's when soil would be put over, topsoil, and then it would be revegetated.
So the fact that you're putting the topsoil over it and revegetating, that means that you really don't need to test it, is what you're saying?
Well, we don't need to test because we're basically already know we're stopping at the mine
You're
tailings.
leaving it there.
And it's going to be left there,
And
but
it's
it's going to be
only
under,
tested if you move it.
if we dig it up and there's the intent of not just simply putting it under the cap, like scraping under the cap, but putting it in another area, like the Peters mine pit area, then it would have to be sampled to make sure, because that's what our record of decision indicates, that they need to sample the material to make sure that it's non-hazardous.
Joe, I'm sorry to do this. Could you read the question once again?
Sure. The CAG may want to ask EPA for additional details about the performance standards for each excavation. Will the contractor only remove visible waste, or will the contractor take confirmatory soil samples to ensure the contaminated soil above residential direct contact soil remediation standards for each contaminant is also removed?
And so that is when to stop.
That's basically when to stop, yeah. And then what we're saying is that's already been defined through the pre-design investigation, and also based upon some of the conditions that were already put into the record of decision in terms of when to stop.
For converting that into basic conversation. Thank you.
So what are you doing with the wetlands? Are you remediating the wetlands that are there, or what's happening there?
Well, I mean, in terms of, you mean the area where it's being, well, it's going to be pulled back, and then anything that doesn't fall under the cap, yeah, it is going to be revegetated. It's going to, topsoil would be put in, and then those areas would be revegetated. And there is like and I think that's one of the comments we're going to be touching on, is the fact that there is a plan that's been developed with the state of New Jersey to basically to restore wetlands out there.
How many acres of wetlands are there, do you know?
How many acres?
Not acres, but how big is the area? Not acres.
Oh, in terms of wetlands?
Yeah.
I mean, there's in terms of what's going to be impacted, I don't know the exact acreage, but there's probably close to about 8 to 10 acres, and not just in the O'Connor disposal area, but just impacted areas. Yeah, there are going to be a number of areas that are going to be impacted, and they'll be restored, and what can be restored, that's part of the permit with the state of New Jersey. The intent is, my understanding is to basically use the old recycling center to basically compensate for some of the lands that are taken away when we implement the remedy. So basically, they'll be required to revegetate the old recycling center, or a large portion of the old recycling center.
How convenient. whatever.
Okay, the next question was the CAG may want to ask EPA to clarify that treated dewatering water will be tested for all contaminants, including 1,4-dioxane, prior to discharge. And we started touching on this the last time also. Basically, the intent is that any dewatering water, and we're primarily going to run into this in the Peters Mine pit area, any of that water would then be pumped up and then discharged within the pit in another area of that pit in order to lower the water table in that area to do whatever work is necessary. Now, the state of New Jersey has basically issued a permit by rule finding, where basically that's their process where when you're dealing with discharge of water, in this case, they don't require the submittal of a permit application and all that. They just basically review the technical documents to determine whether or not it meets their requirements. And in this case, the state of New Jersey has basically said, but by that permit by rule finding, that it's okay once the dewatering water is treated to basically discharge it back to that area without having to test the water. Because basically you're just pulling the water and putting it back in the same area. However, when it comes to, and this is where I was not correct the last time around, when it comes to the detention basin, there's the option to basically put some of that treated dewatering water into that detention basin that's going to be constructed near the Peters Mine pit. That water, if they choose to discharge some of the water, the dewatering water there, would need to be tested for contamination after it's been treated, including 1,4-dioxane.
I have a question going back to the wetlands for a minute, sorry, I'm a little slower. When they, I'm going to assume they take whatever natural flora is there,
Yeah.
and they just fauna will show up hopefully if they
Well,
revegetate it.
Well, they have to.
Will they continue to, will they test that the way they've tested before, since again, the people around there live on the
You mean,
wildlife
will
to the
they
area?
actually test?
To make sure that
Well,
whatever
anything that's
was
gonna-
under the cap isn't ending up back in the vegetation or in the wildlife?
Well, I mean, basically, where they're revegetating is being revegetated, and basically there's going to be clean soil put down there. So there really wouldn't be, as far as I can see, a need to retest that vegetation. There will be a plan, though, to make sure, to monitor that vegetation, to make sure that it basically survives to a certain degree. There's a certain percentage, it's like 80 or 85% survival rate, to make sure the
They're just going to monitor it to know that it grows,
That's
but
correct, to
not
make
that it
sure.
stays clean.
Well, I mean, again, it's being revegetated in clean material, so there would be no reason to.
Okay.
Back to the question of pathways, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's bad, exactly. I mean, if it's being put into clean soil, then there would be no expectation that it would somehow be contaminated because it's being grown in clean soil.
And then the runoff, let's say, from what's underneath the cap.
Well, the runoff from the cap is, I mean, again, the cap is going to be clean material too. So any runoff is going to be clean also. The contaminated material is underneath the cap. And then there's going to be monitoring, groundwater monitoring, to ensure that we're not seeing any sort of significant
It's just hard
migration
to
of
visualize
contaminants.
how it's all going to be. Like, the wetlands are not going to be behind the fence. They're going to be open to people. Like,
Well,
what's it going to look like?
What do you?
Like, you're going to have the recycling center, you're going to
Yeah.
have the detention basin, and then right around
And then you're going to have a vegetated
all those
area going
wetlands
down
there.
down
Yeah.
the side of the hillside down to the creek.
Right.
Yeah.
All within the recycling center fencing.
Well, and wetlands towards the end may not be within the fence.
There is a process, and the word escapes me right now, but will there be sketches in any of the plans that will
Yeah, I mean-
actually show?
And I mean, there's some preliminary sketches in the design report already. I mean, if you look in there, it'll show in terms of what the plans are in terms of revegetation in the area. That would be included in the NJDEP permit application. There are plans for revegetation of the wetlands there. And in terms of construction and recycling, I mean, the recycling center, there were some preliminary plans, I think, also included in the design report for the recycling center also.
You said there will be testing of the water table underneath the cap?
Well, there will be,
That comes
as
out
long as
from
there is material in place in these areas, capped in these areas, there is going to be groundwater monitoring associated. Yeah, that'll be part of the, you know, the operation, monitoring, and maintenance of the area.
Cool. Since you're swamping through the state of New Jersey, they're swamping wetlands, let's say. What are they doing at the recycling center? Are they tearing it up?
Well, they are going to have to revegetate, which means they are going to have to, you know, obviously probably pull up some of that that asphalt.
Bring it back to its natural.
And that's basically what they're going to do.
So the community gets the old recycling center, and the EPA is basically agreeing to cap toxic waste in the area that was supposed to be open space. Just seems illogical, but I understand the decision. I don't, but I know if the decision has been made, maybe.
Well, you know, again, in terms of the land use, we don't determine land use.
I understand.
No, because
For
again,
sure.
I've said this a million times, it's a residential zone that we're building a new recycling center in, so the town doesn't really pay attention to land use either.
No.
We don't determine zoning.
I know that's not your problem, it's our problem, but it is a residential zone, which the borough has refused to pay any attention to. It's a residential zone that they're leaving toxic waste and putting in a new recycling center. So zoning doesn't seem to matter.
I do want to ask, and I think it ties into the question of not the zoning, but the fact that it is a residential area, and the question of visuals. As an action item, it might be helpful to go back and pull out the visuals that are available. They're scattered throughout documents, and just put them on the website. We'll be talking about that later. But so that people don't have to search through it to answer your question of what will this look like, let's pull out what is available, add to it as the process goes along. It will help people get it in their mind, I think. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next question was, Ken, we want to ask EPA what steps will be taken to prevent contaminated groundwater from being discharged from the detention pond to other locations. And again, I think we already addressed that. Though any water that we would be putting into the detention basin, you know, the possibility of there being water were put in would already be treated when it goes in. So there would be no need to basically test it or treat it again because it's already been treated.
Joe, can you remind us where the description of the treatment is, which document?
Where the
So when you talk about the treatment of...
oh, that's in the everything is
It's
in the
in the
remedial
remedial,
design
okay.
report. Yeah.
Thank you.
And anything with regards to the wetlands, restoration of wetlands, that would be in the permit application, the permit document that was submitted to the state, which is attached to the remedial design report. The next question was, the CAG may want to ask EPA whether any site perimeter monitoring will be done for dust and VOCs. If so, the CAG may want to ask EPA what levels of dust or VOCs and air trigger actions and what actions will be taken. And this is another item which I think we touched upon this the last time. The technical specifications that are included in the design report require that the remedial action contractor submit that remedial action work plan. Along with that, there's a requirement for there to be a site health and safety plan generated that's routine, and that would be submitted at the same time. It would be part of that remedial action work plan or be submitted concurrent with that remedial action work plan, and that's where those details in terms of any sort of monitoring, health and safety monitoring, would be contained. So you basically you're going to have to wait for that RA work plan and the health and safety plan to be submitted before you can find out more details in terms of the monitoring that would be conducted. But you would expect that there would be activities for dust suppression and monitoring and so forth conducted to ensure health and safety. Okay, we want EPA to require that excavated soils with concentrations of a constituent of concern above the applicable state standard will be disposed of off-site, and any imported soil will be certified as clean. Again, the record of decision specifically allows for the reuse of excavated soils as long as it's been tested and determined to be non-hazardous. So, I mean, that's already provided for in the record of decision. If it's determined to be non-hazardous, even if it exceeded a soil cleanup standard, it could be put back in the disposal area, like in the Peters Mine pit area. However, any of the imported soil that would be used to, say, construct the cap, that would need to be certified clean material. So anything anybody could be potentially exposed to is going to be clean. Okay, we want to ask how using modular blocks would change the construction of the reinforced soil zone, with the change being more or less protective of the cap or groundwater. You know, again, Cornerstone has clarified that that reinforced soil zone has nothing to do with protection. It's an additional zone that's placed there to help support that retaining wall, and basically the use of the modular blocks, modular blocks handle any sort of movement or settlement better than a reinforced concrete wall. So there's less stringent requirements on that reinforced soil zone. You can have a little bit of movement without damaging the wall, essentially.
Where is that zone again?
That's going to be part of the, I think it's at the northern part of the, western part of the recycling center. Okay, we want to ask EPA for more information on the landfill gas monitoring program, and specifically what levels of concern and landfill gas monitoring points necessitate action. Landfill gas monitoring is usually, that plan is usually incorporated in what we call an operation and maintenance plan, or an operation monitoring and maintenance plan. And EPA requires that the contractor submit that plan before construction is complete, because then the next stage is operation and maintenance of it. So we don't have that plan developed at this point in time. It'll be developed sometime during the actual remedial construction.
So that's another.
Yet another plan.
Yeah, so we need to add that to our list,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, we want to ask EPA if soil vapor intrusion protection will be required for the recycling center buildings. And basically, a comparison of what we're seeing in the groundwater to our vapor intrusion screening levels indicates that there wouldn't need to be any sort of vapor intrusion protection at the recycling center. And I think the next comments are with regards to the interim groundwater monitoring program. TAS suggests that the CAG asked EPA if RW10 can be sampled. This well is downgrading to the Catamine pit area and has increasing levels of total and dissolved arsenic since 2012. Well, while it looks like those levels might just be fluctuating, EPA will ask for that to be included in the groundwater monitoring program.
But even if it's fluctuating, it's still over the level.
There's still some levels of arsenic in that well, yes. But so, and we will, like I said, we will ask for the RD work plan to be revised to include sampling of that well also. The next one, task suggests that CAG asks EPA if at least one overburden well or a shallow bedrock well in the Canamine pit area. They recommend either RW9A or OB3 could be included, and essentially EPA will ask for well OB3 to be included. That well is actually, I believe, the only well that's located on the, I guess it would be the western side of the Canamine pit area, and historically we had seen, back when they were doing the paint sludge removal on Sludge Hill, had seen some levels of TCE show up in that well. It was like a blip for a round or two and then disappeared. So we will include or ask for that well to be included.
Will there be other monitoring wells around?
Yeah, there are.
New ones, I mean.
Would we be installing new ones? Right now, we're just
By
looking at, yeah, we're not planning on installing any new wells during this interim groundwater monitoring program, but of course we have a groundwater remedy coming up, and we've already discussed how there will be, sentinel wells, the need for sentinel wells evaluated as part of the alternatives of the feasibility study.
Right.
So there is the potential for additional wells to be installed. But right now, as part of the interim groundwater monitoring program, we don't see a need to install additional wells since we have, a pretty significant monitoring well network out there. Okay. The task suggests that the CAG asks EPA if OB19 and RW5 can be sampled. These two wells are close together in the Peters Mine Pit area. RW5 had 1,4-dioxane, and we are going to ask that those two wells be included also in the groundwater monitoring program. The next one, CAG, we want to ask EPA if wells RW14S, 14D, and SC01 can continue to be sampled. We will ask for RW14 and 14S and 14D to continue to be samples as part of the interim groundwater monitoring program. However, well SC01 is actually in the pit itself, and that well is going to have to be closed. That well is not going to survive the work that's going to be done in the pit. So that well is going to be closed.
So these wells you're talking about, because nobody knows where they are down gradient?
They are down gradient of the Peters Mine pit, yeah.
Thanks for highlighting that.
The CAG may want SDPA to consider installing a deep bedrock well down gradient of the O'Connor disposal area. RW16, which is the one bedrock well in that area, is near the middle of the O'Connor disposal area footprint, but there are no bedrock wells down gradient. At this point in time, we don't see the need to install another bedrock well. That bedrock well is clean. We're not seeing a whole lot of contamination in the shallow wells within the O'Connor disposal area. But of course, as I've indicated, that there would be an evaluation in the feasibility study of alternatives, which would also look at the possibility of installing some additional sentinel wells. So
yeah, because the contamination is deep, so you need a deep well now.
yeah, and that's why we put in, but the contamination appears to be related to the Peter, in terms of the 1,4-dioxane related to the Peters Mine area, and that's why the well was put in the, because if it was flowing in that direction, we would expect to see it in that well, and that well has been cleaned. So we're not seeing deep contamination that far
I
out.
don't think you could really go by just one well there. I don't know.
And that'll be part of the OU3.
The evaluation of additional wells would be part of the OU3 feasibility study. The evaluation of the need for additional sentinel wells.
Because the Jacobs report commented on that also, that there were no deep groundwater wells down gradient of the O'Connor landfill. So I think that's a point.
Yeah, and it's something we can look at as part of the OU3 feasibility study in terms of additional sentinel wells we might want to install out there. The task suggests that the CAG ask EPA if RW12, which is the bedrock well near the Sally's Pond, could also be sampled. And actually we are going to ask that that well and the shallow wells OB10 and OB29 there they're all clustered together,
Yeah.
also be sampled because we have had some trace levels of dioxane, not in the bedrock well, but in the shallow wells there.
Is there anything on the other side of Sally's Pond? Any wells?
No, there are no wells related to our monitoring well network on the other side.
Right.
But then again, the wells that are there in Sally's Pond are not showing 1,4-dioxane at anywhere near the, the standard. I mean, we're looking at like 0.1 parts per billion showing up in the shallow wells and not in the bedrock well.
Now, the well that you have, who has it? I don't remember now. Is it the EPA or the DEP that has the well at the shooting range?
What's the
your
shooting
well?
range? No, that would be the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. I think,
Oh,
handles
they have
those.
a
I think
monitoring
they
well
have
there?
wells there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
you can speak
Yeah.
to them about.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Okay, we want to ask EPA if there's a plan to monitor the health of the wetlands after restoration is complete, and we've already touched on that. It's part of the permit with the land use and NJDEP's land use regulation program. Okay, we want to ask EPA whether NJD approval is pending for any additional permit equivalent applications associated with the remedial design, and if public comment is allowed. Basically, as we've indicated, the permits through NJDEP are essentially complete at this point in time. Borough of Ringwood are going to have to get their own permits for construction of associated with construction of the landfill. So those permits or permit equivalents are still out there in the future. And then at the end, when all the remedy has been implemented here, the state of New Jersey is going to want to see what's known as a soil remedial action permit equivalent applied for, through NJDEP here. And that's basically, it looks like they just do that to ensure that there's a plan to, when you have something like this, a remedy where materials stay in place above standards, and there's an engineering control or an institutional control put into place, that there's a plan to take care of that engineering control, to pay for that engineering control, and to basically deal with that in the future.
Who'll be monitoring that whole thing? DEP?
Oh no, the potentially responsible parties would be monitoring anyway. Hopefully, we will have an enforcement agreement, implemented here, a consent decree, which would require basically the implementation of the remedy and monitoring of the remedy. The CAG may want to ask for an updated schedule. Basically, the schedule that was provided in the design report, basically there are generic months, and that's what's essentially not going to change here. I know there were some old dates put in there, but at this point in time, because the contractor can't tell, well, when's the RD report going to be approved, any dates they put in may simply not be valid in the very short term, because the report might be approved months later than what they're anticipating. So, a schedule in just generic terms is what's essentially appropriate, at this point in time. Roles and responsibilities. The report does not indicate any role for EPA. The CAG may want to ask how EPA will be involved in remedy construction. Will EPA provide any oversight or inspect the constructed remedy prior to completion? And again, the roles and remedies are going to be defined in the remedial action contractor's remedial action work plan. However, EPA will, of course, oversee construction, and there will be inspections and so forth to verify that the remedy has been constructed, as designed.
Is that after or during or both?
Well, we'll be overseeing the remedy, either, EPA, it's usually either myself or one of our representatives. Typically, we've had in the past the Army Corps of Engineers out here to oversee the work while it's being conducted, and then there would be an inspection at the end where EPA would attend that. And the state of New Jersey typically attends that also. The remedial design requires noise control, but few details provided. The CAG may want to ask how noise levels will be measured, what measurements will be taken, what noise levels will prompt action. Again, there are some noise control details already provided in the technical specifications in the remedial design report. However, full details will be provided in that the upcoming remedial action work plan. Similarly, there was concern about the truck routes, and again, the specifics regarding the truck routes are going to be part of the remedial action work plan. And then there's concerns about communication with the public. There's no plan for communicating with the public. The CAG may want to ask how community members can ask for information or report safety or health concerns during remedial action. You know, as is the case right now, you know, typically when the work is going on, there are signs posted on, on the fence at the site indicating it's a Superfund site, and for any questions or concerns, contact, and it's generally, I think, me right now. My number's there. So, I mean, that's what you would expect, that there would be that. And of course, in terms of any concerns, we're going to have, CAG meetings. You can clearly share any concerns with us during the CAG meetings.
Just a question going back to what you were saying about the dust in the air and particulates in the air. Will the residents get some kind of written notification if you're going to be doing something where they might be concerned? Say if they have COPD or asthma, maybe they should be using masks.
I mean,
something like that.
The issue, basically, there will be monitoring to make sure that there aren't unacceptable levels of dust generated, and there will be actions taken. I mean, they're basically going to be moving around a lot of soil out here. And generally, water trucks, that's the routine, water down, keep the dust, keep control of dust. They usually have monitoring equipment to monitor dust levels at the perimeter. So you can expect that would all be part of the health and safety plan that would be generated and which would be submitted either as part of the remedial action work plan or concurrent with the remedial action work plan.
But would there be times when there might be more dust or particulates that people need to worry about?
Well, again, there wouldn't be times where it would,
wouldn't get it to
if the levels got too high, basically they need to stop work and take action to bring those levels down. They're not going to be allowed to, say, okay, we can generate unacceptable levels of dust at a certain time. I mean, it's basically the levels will be set and they have to keep the levels, keep it down below those levels.
Does EPA ever make use of social media to like do progress reports on a Facebook page for a region, or in Ringwood there's Ringwood moms and moms and dads and voices, and a lot of that stuff is shared locally, and I'm wondering if there's a way that we could link in and communicate that way so that people knew, if there's going to be a lot of truck traffic on a particular day, people can just avoid going to the old recycling center at that time.
Yeah, I mean, we do that. I mean, we do a lot of Twittering and not so much Facebook pages. But yeah, we can work something out with our social media people and figure out how to link you into that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, somehow so that, we can connect it to our CAG page.
Yeah, there should be an easy way to link the
I
whatever,
would
the
think
Twitter
it would be.
feed to the
Yeah.
Facebook page for the
Yeah,
CAG.
if we know that if we know you tweet it, we can follow the tweets and put them on our,
Okay.
so that, yeah.
Yeah, I would think that would be fairly simple to do.
Because
We can
then,
figure it out, though.
people have to go to your website and look for it, but this pushes it out instead of making people seek it.
We'll look into what we could do.
A lot of times what we do here at other sites, when these kinds of questions come up during the cleanup, if we've generated an email list, which we're trying to do and improve on right now, and something like that happens, we can blast something out very quickly.
Yeah.
We have done that before.
But your email list, is limited.
Well,
and-
that's the problem, exactly. But I mean, our
That
more
wasn't
people-
just gives the people in Ringwood something to pay attention to and complain about. They love following the progress of our bridge, so I'm sure they'll love following the progress of your cleanup if we give it to them on social media.
I would just really wish, in order to do something like that we had email addresses of more of the people who live on the site.
Yes.
You know, because
That's
obviously
what I
Yeah.
think,
exactly.
health-wise,
And
yes.
that's something we've just never been able to do a very good job at, so.
I am going to flag this for additional follow-up, I think at another meeting, is enhancing the communication network. And, you know, think about what options might be available, especially in the upper Ringwood community.
I would like
To even,
And who tweets up there?
I know.
you know, who's on social media and are there
I
maybe
think
some
a lot.
key contacts that if you needed to text some message out that they could reach out. So I will put this for future.
Yeah, I don't know if they tweet, but I see them on social media. I
Oh,
see them on
On
Facebook.
Facebook.
I know they're on
right.
Facebook.
Let me talk to Sophie Reddy, I'll check with her too about the Facebook. Yeah. So for instance, we have, you know, a site, well, you know, on the lake site right next door. And, you know, we're doing work there, we're dredging the lake. Now, it's pretty much a Monday through Friday thing, but occasionally there might be some Saturday work. Not that they're working, maybe they're cleaning equipment or, you know, doing something like that. So I have about an email list of about 400 people who live right across from that. So, you know, we just blast that out to them. And I think people appreciate hearing that, you know.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to make a bigger effort to try and get email addresses
Yeah.
from the people that live up there too.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful. Okay.
And that was the last question.
Oh,
Joe, this is not a question that you were prepared to respond to, and I want to just put it up because we can put that on a future agenda item too. When we had the question about the, you know, when do you stop digging, and there was the question of the performance standards and the evacuation samples. Is there a discussion or about what happens if drums or paint sludge deposits are encountered during the cleanup? What's the process for that?
Yeah, there's actually going to be another plan that's going to be developed by the remedial action contractor, a paint sludge and drum remnant excavation plan. So if materials like that are encountered, they got to get excavated, staged, sampled, and then disposed of off-site as appropriate.
I thought that's the stuff we're burying anyway.
Well, during the digging up, if they're, for instance, digging in the O'Connor disposal area and they're pulling materials up into the cap area and they uncover some paint sludge, now we're not, they're uncovered, it's there, it's going to be addressed, it's going to be taken off and staged.
Because you have contaminated soils, but then you actually have toxic materials.
You have basically, the waste material.
The waste
yeah. And so if that's encountered, those materials would be addressed.
So you're leaving toxic soil. But if you find solid material,
If we find
it's
something
going in.
during the work, then it would be removed. It would be staged, sampled, and removed. Drums, drum remnants, paint sludge, which is what we've typically found.
Can I ask Joe a question about an item? Joe, going back to talking about the CAG, may I ask if the cap should be less permeable? Right? So you're saying that because your monitoring is not turning up any contamination in the groundwater at this point in time, so it's okay for rain or whatever to go through the cap. Correct me if I'm wrong. And there's no risk of any future contamination of the groundwater. So it's only to keep the people above it from touching any contaminated material, but the permeability of the cap allows any water to go through and to flow through.
It will allow some water to go through. The cap will be sloped, so you'll also get a lot of water which will run off because it's simply sloped.
Right, so you're saying that there may be chunks of paint sludge. That doesn't make me feel any better. I think I brought this up before, that, like right now, you're basing your design of the cap and everything on the fact that you're not picking up any groundwater contamination. But, so you're assuming that nothing's going to happen in the future with these chunks of paint sludge. And you are going to monitor it. So
yes.
What happens after you put the cap on there, you build this recycling center, and then a plume appears because things change? Maybe one of these chunks of paint sludge deteriorates in the future and lets out something bad, So what would you do then?
Then, I mean, if the new evidence comes to light that indicates that the remedy that we selected is no longer protective as it stands, and necessary actions will be taken to essentially make it protected. So if you know, we determined in the future that you know, there was a, I don't know, there's a plume, like as you're indicating. You know, we don't anticipate this because, you know, we're now 50 years out and we're not seeing, you know,
You're
a
making
large
an assumption that
but
it's not gonna
just saying, you know, small chance you get a plume coming off from one area of the site where it's been capped, and now you've got to deal with that. I mean, we may require that that part of the cap be dug up and the source removed. I mean, again, I'm just telling you that we would require that the remedy be made protected.
That doesn't make me feel too good, but okay. You know, I mean, because you have this recycling center that you built on top of it, you know, what are you gonna do? Like temporarily remove it and fix it, you know, and then put it, you can't.
Well,
you know?
again, we don't anticipate that based upon, you know, the sampling that's been conducted, the fact that we've already removed large amounts of paint sludge from the O'Connor disposal area, and the fact that we're really not seeing a whole lot of leaching off of the paint sludge to begin with out here. So we don't anticipate that, and that's basically why we selected a permeable cap to begin with. We were more concerned with people coming into contact with the material. But if, you know, off chance that something did happen where conditions changed, we would need to reevaluate that remedy and then essentially make the situation protected.
Right. I guess we'll all have to hope that your assumptions are valid and correct for now.
Before we move on in the agenda, there's public comments at the end.
I'm sorry.
No, we've had some public comments. I just want to make sure that if anybody else has some questions about the remedial design, we may not be able to answer them, you know, at the moment. But if other people have questions about the remedial design report, I'm opening up the floor to other questions, if there are any.
I don't have a question. I'm Gary DePippo with Cornerstone Environmental Group, but I just wanted to add a couple of quick things to Joe's descriptions that maybe might help answer some of the questions that were asked. One is regarding the wetlands. The only wetlands that are going to be restored will be in areas where the waste has been removed, and that's only going to occur in the O'Connor disposal area. The total amount of disturbance, I don't remember the exact number, but it's only a few acres, 3 to 4. So the restoration will only occur adjacent to Park Brook where all the waste has been pulled back. Just so that's clear. The restoration work, the majority of it is in what's called the riparian zone of Park Brook, which is forested area currently. So the work that will be done at the existing recycling center is actually for riparian zone restoration, not for wetlands restoration. So yes, Joe is correct. The pavement will be removed, the area will be restored to more of a natural setting, and it will become primarily forested because the requirements of the DEP are for a riparian zone to be restored in kind, meaning if it's currently forested, it has to be forested for the restoration and the mitigation plan.
What size trees do they plant to start with?
There is a detailed restoration plan, and they are smaller trees, obviously. I don't remember the exact sizes. There's a combination of various shrubbery and trees. Most of the trees are in the 4 to 5 foot range, give or take. There are detailed restoration plans in the permit applications that were submitted to the DEP and also in the remedial design for the riparian zones and the wetlands restoration.
Thank you.
Do you know how large the old recycling center is? I mean, I live here, I have no idea.
It's about 3 to 3.5 acres, if I remember correctly.
Thank you.
And that's all I wanted to do was add those comments. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. Joe, weren't there some outstanding questions that you were going to ask the EPA hydrologist?
Yes, and I'm still waiting to get her comments on the RI
So we can
report
add
and
that
to
to the
address
next
that,
step.
yeah.
And when is the remedial action work plan going to be forthcoming?
Again, that would come, you see, that there,
We've been able
We
to
would
see,
need
because
to-
we were talking about trying to figure
before we
this
get to the
out.
remedial action work plan, there are a few things that need to happen. First, we need to have an approved remedial design report. Also, we need to select a remedial action contractor. However, that won't occur until an enforcement agreement is in place with the potentially responsible parties.
Why don't we just look at the timeline, because I think this feeds into it.
That's kind of our next
It's
agenda item
it's our
anyway.
next agenda item anyway. So if
Nice-
you're looking at this.
nice segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can a little.
And now I've got some extra items
got a
to
way
add
to
to
go.
this
Yeah.
already, but Joe is reading right underneath OU2, so go ahead and.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, the next, we have to have the RD report approved, and then at the same time, we're currently working on trying to negotiate an enforcement agreement with the potential responsible parties to actually do the remedial action. That agreement has to be in place. There needs to be an enforcement agreement in place before we would proceed to actually have selection of a remedial action contractor, and then ultimately that RA contractor would develop the remedial action work plan. So it all depends upon how long it takes for the RD report to be approved, which is, we're pretty close at this point in time, and the enforcement agreement to be negotiated.
Who selects the contractors, the EPA or the PRPs?
The PRP proposes the contractor, and then we essentially, say yay or nay on it.
And I'll change that because it says PRP selects, and I'll say PRP proposes.
Yeah, I mean, they basically say this is the contractor they want to use, and if we have an issue with it, we can raise that issue.
And then Joe walked through the next steps from OU2, looking at this timeline. It can get confusing. There's a lot going on here. You've got the OU3 for the groundwater. You've got the OU2 for the soils. There's already 2 extra items to be added on here for OU2, which is the paved sludge drum excavation plan, which appears again.
Yeah, which is, again, that's all, and those plans, they all get submitted, and they can all be part of that, what we call the remedial action work plan.
Yeah,
So a
and
bunch of
that's a
little
very
plans
generic
that-
title though. When you start breaking it out, I think
I
it
mean-
helps give people a better idea about the things that are being
Mhm.
What's
addressed.
going to happen, right?
And that the operation monitoring and maintenance plan prior
That would be
to
submitted
completion.
prior to completion of the remedy.
The other, looking at this, one, is this helpful for people to have this type of process laid out? I know that you've probably seen it multiple times in other documents. It's nice to be able to pull it out. One other piece that I'm hearing though tonight is that New Jersey, in the permitting process, there's other plans, so the restoration plan, and it would help to put on each side with OU3 and OU2, yeah, start to layer it so that you get the whole picture of the pieces that are
Okay.
going into it.
I mean, because again, that plan is all included with the RD report, and when you get to the RA work plan, you may have a whole bunch of these little plans that are part of that RA work plan, so it can
Right.
get quite confusing.
Well, and it can get quite confusing, which is why it's sometimes helpful to have a map that you can just literally look at and see how the pieces fit together. And it sounds like maybe that would be a follow-up with Mark and Ken to talk to them about the plans and fit them in investing. We appreciate that you have done this a long time and know it, but the more people hear about it and are familiar with it, it gets easier for the people to ask the right questions and to know when they need to be paying more attention or where they might want to look for additional resources. So, and thank you for that. Is there anything else that would be helpful to people in this type of timeline or next steps? So one item that we're adding is the relationship to the New Jersey permitting process and maybe what's involved. Are there other things that come to mind? And we can certainly add in.
Well, the only thing is, and it may just be me, but it makes me crazy that this is going bottom to top and not top to bottom. If I'm following a timeline, I'm going this way. I'm
I
not
was
going
just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't know why we're, it's like, that may be my librarian brain. I expect things to be in a certain order.
So this,
Yeah, it's like, we start here and then we
Yes.
work our way down. We
That's
don't
what
start
this
down
is.
here, we work our way up. No,
It
we're
is.
going this way.
no, we started up here,
We're starting on top.
start on top.
Well, why is OU2 on the bottom and
Because
OU3 is on the top?
OU2 has done these things. So this is the whole process for each OU. And so there is a good footnote that needs to be added.
I'm
This doesn't
I'm working my way to the
bottom.
bottom. This is not making sense to me. Okay.
Yeah, so what's happening is
Work
that
started.
OU2 started at the top and is working
It's
its way
down.
through and now is trying to get approval for the final remedial design report.
So
So
all of this already happened.
all of that already happened.
Right.
Yes.
The last thing that happens is the work actually starts, because that's when they like break ground on the
Yeah,
writing.
work started and then.
So I think that's
Oh,
the
we're
word that's
ending-
confusing.
we're ending with work
Right.
started.
That's
And
like
I'm
work started
starting it
is.
started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Work started is like breaking
And then
ground.
OU3 is early in the process, so I see
When we
an
begin.
important footnote, so thank you for raising that.
Alright.
Okay. All right.
Well, under what has to happen in the permitting process of the DEP,
Yeah.
that is really what the borough has to do. They have.
Well,
outstanding
there,
permits.
yeah, I mean, there are, there are permits or permit equivalents that the borough
Yeah.
would need to.
And
Like
that's
that's,
good to know.
that might be like a layer that's important
Yeah.
there, then is who is responsible for the actions at each different steps, like who issues, like EPA issues record of decision, who's applying for which permits, and where do they need to get them from, like, at each level of this.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts or suggestions on the timeline and the information that is helpful to try and track the process that's going on?
I like your idea of having the photos of the diagrams and what it's
Yeah.
going to look like.
We're going to recap the action items at the end before we close out.
Okay.
And this is not the only time that, as people come up with ideas about what's helpful, please send them in. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Because we just finished with this piece of it, and we're looking at the timeline and the work, would it be all right if we flipped the question and maybe went to the technical assistance piece? Because I think it flows. We just spoke about the comments that SKIO submitted on remedial design. They reviewed the document, and Pat,
Yeah.
in the task, SKIO, so looking on the right hand of this timeline, SKIO is going to be asked to evaluate which document?
The feasibility
The
study would be
feasibility
next.
study.
Right.
So on the feasibility study, we have SKIO already,
Well, we don't have the feasibility study yet, so they haven't had a chance.
but
to take
they're already assigned
Yeah,
to.
that's part of the technical directive that exists, yes. Now that, right now, is the last document that they're on board to review and comment on. And you had mentioned, Rebecca, that maybe there were some other documents. And I think I sent back to you that that's fine, but you just can't say some documents.
Oh, yeah, we have to know what they
Right,
are.
we have to know what they are.
Yeah.
Then I would have to send an email to our headquarters, who runs the task program, and request that.
That's maybe something we could discuss later
Well,
down the road,
Yeah.
what they could be.
that's right. And right now, I think we, again, ask the questions often because information changes. Right now, when you start to look at this at this process, the flow diagram, are there things that come to mind now that you say, well, you know, this might be a good area? Does anybody have any initial ideas right now in terms of further reports?
Well, my idea, I'd like the SCIO to look at the borough's submission to the Remedy Review Board. Is that a possibility?
You know, that's a good question, and I don't know if it has to be an EPA-related document. It may have to be, because remember, they could look at the...
Jacob's report,
right,
which they did,
yeah,
sort of.
right.
And-
I will check those, to be sure.
Yeah, because it's submitted to the EPA.
No, that's okay.
It is, but the Board Commission's report was too, so let me find, that's
Okay.
a good question, I will find
Okay,
out.
find out.
I'll talk to them
And so just one
tomorrow.
that comes to mind?
Yes.
And if there's others, and as the process evolves,
Mhm.
and as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of pieces that relate to the work action plan. As that starts to come up and people understand what's in there, then it might make sense to say,
Something
well,
might come
Yeah,
down
once
at
those
us,
documents start to
Yeah.
come out, I think there's probably gonna be stuff in there we'll have to look at.
okay. And relate, so, Robin, do you have any thoughts on Gretchen at this time? What is the interest in terms of other technical presentations and other technical information that CAG members would like to have? Like, moving forward, I know that there was an email exchange about groundwater and testing of municipal wells, is that right? Does anybody want to recap?
Oh, yeah, well, we were going to throw that out there, maybe that the borough would present that next meeting, or what?
And what specific types of information, drilling down and allowing people to prepare well,
Right.
and, you know, Joe gets a chance to go through and research back.
Mhm.
And thank you for taking the off-the-cuff questions, because that's hard, you know, you gotta just pull it from what you can remember. What types of specific information might we want to request from the borough, and what was that, you know, what's rolling forward?
Well, we wanted them to talk about the testing that they did for 1,4-dioxane.
Was that recently?
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I mean, you had suggested that we put that on the next meeting, so.
Right, but let's, yeah.
You know, what were the results? What kind of tests were they? How much did they cost? How often did they intend testing? This wasn't a test that was directed by the EPA, right?
No, we would like
Yeah,
to
we-
read them.
Okay.
That's the article that was in the paper.
Yeah.
So, because we have borough representatives here, is that something that if we work together, somebody could give a presentation of what was done and an overview? The information is out in the paper. The borough took action to do some testing. Could somebody provide?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a presentation. I mean, it's you found a non-detect at the Valley Road well. It's not, I don't know how much further to go, you know?
Oh, you only tested one well?
I think so. I don't, you know, I don't know the details. I know the non-detect part.
Well, but the article said you tested all the wells.
I didn't see an article.
Not that we've ever had disconnects. So this is joint fact finding, and I think the question is could the borough just, you know, talk briefly, provide an overview of what actually was done, or how the testing occurred, how many, because otherwise information that is out in the community may or may not be accurate.
Correct.
And it would be helpful, I think, for the borough to say what the work was done, and is that something that we could talk about offline? Is that something that could be considered?
No, we can mention it at the next CAG meeting. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
It's not going to take a lot of agenda time, I don't think.
No.
Right, no, but thank you for that. And we'll just follow up with some of the questions that were talked about and what you're able to share and go from that.
Okay.
Okay? Is there other types of information that people would like? The one thing that I have, and I'll go to some of the action items that we have, we're following up with the requests, information about the permits, what are the plans associated with it, who has to apply. Just a little recap of that. In terms of technical information, the visuals. So let's pull together the visuals so people can start to answer the question of what does this look like.
Yeah.
And on a related note, if we have technical information coming in and this becomes important further down the road once work starts, is then how does that information get pushed out? And so that's also a conversation. So there's a couple items right there.
I wanted to ask Pat something, but maybe I'll do it with, you're
Go
gonna.
ahead.
Oh,
About DOH.
about the what?
You're going to ask me about DOH?
I was gonna ask you about the New Jersey Health. They always, yes.
Yes.
DOH. Okay, I'm not good at like initials.
Department of Health. Yeah, actually, I spoke to Krista, who had been a presentation. Now,
I did say it right today.
Well, she did not give a presentation. She was here one time with Jerry Faliano, and there was another time a person from her office, Kate Greedy, gave a presentation.
Yes.
Now, so Krista, what she sent me, which I will send you, and you can, was their link to their webpage that has all the information on Ringwood, every presentation they've ever made.
Okay.
So you could look through that and see which one it is that you're talking about. She thought it might have been the community health profile. That's
Yes.
the one that she would think would be the
That's
most
what I
obvious
think.
one, and that is on here, because I did look today. So I will send you this.
But it would be great if she could do it again.
I don't think she would do it. She would, I think it was
Not
her
Krista,
supervisor, but whoever had done it.
Yeah.
before. Now, Jerry's long gone, he's retired, but obviously
Okay.
there's somebody
Yes,
else there.
Whoever did it that couple years ago.
Well, do you want to take a look at it first and
Okay.
make sure which one it is?
Yeah.
And then I can reach back out to them and see if they can send somebody
Okay,
to do
so
that in
you
the
just
future.
email.
I will send you that link.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Sure.
I'm writing notes on the technical presentation, so the DOH presentation previously. The visuals and the permits and plans. Now, with getting information in, question is about getting information back out. That takes us to Pat. And the website, is it possible for us to bring the current webpage up on the projector?
If anybody knows how to use the projector. Yeah.
We'll see if we can do it.
Robin does.
Maybe.
And while we're talking and seeing how many people it takes to hopefully successfully get this up and running, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the format?
Oh, so easy, I'm really good. What's the web address?
If you just Google Ringwood Lines Land Superfund site, you'll come up right at the top.
You said that the EPA has structured, has some requirements about how web pages are structured, not necessarily the easiest for finding documents. Do you just want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my right, they just revamped the whole system. And, everything.
that's it, the second one.
It's not Wikipedia. It's never required. The second
Nobody
one.
wants to cumulus or something.
Yeah, I know. So they just revamped the whole system, and the whole idea was to make it user-friendly, and I think it's not as user-friendly as it used to be. You know, there's, you'll see when you go through, there's, yeah, there you are.
Plus, everything takes so long to come in.
Does it when you go in there? Yeah.
To load?
Maybe because it's a big dial.
Yeah.
For instance, if there's a meeting, like the meeting here tonight, and I hope I put it on, it's under stay updated, get involved. Now, to me, in the old system, right there on this home page would have been the time and the place of the meeting, which to me seems more logical. Because I don't know how many people are going to go, stay updated, get involved, needs a meeting. Well, I shouldn't be saying this because I'm like, you know, that's why I don't system, but I can, you know, I can bring this back, and I believe me, I said that to them a couple of times. But, want to go to that?
Yes, and so talking about, what you're saying is that right here, for example, you would have next meeting right here
Yeah.
available,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, like here's previous public participation opportunities.
So we're already on the second click.
Right, and that shows that these were, you know, the previous meetings. Now, for instance, for the documents, site documents and,
Well, actually, you know what? We should be. So when they say have that little survey,
oh, yeah.
yes, please actually do and take a moment and
Where
say,
is it?
this is not
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
We need to know immediately on the site
When the meeting is.
when the next meeting is.
So I
So
need to check some.
get your friends to log in, get them to respond to the survey.
So here's our meeting for tonight. Well, you made it on there, so
That's a good sign. So the request is getting
they're
processed.
actually very good. I mean, as soon as I send it, you know. But again, if you don't, once you go to that stay involved thing, there's still like 4 other, you know, things that you have to get through to get to this. So I think sometimes a lot of people give up and then they'll call me and they say, well, you know, the information we need isn't on there. Well, it's not that it's not on there, it's just that it's difficult to find.
And if you go back to the main page, is the contact information?
The contact, Joe's and my information is, oh, let's see, where's the home page? Yeah.
No, that's your supervisor.
Is it searchable? Is there a search, is there a search where you can search for specific documents?
Yes, see up in the top, search EPA.
Yeah.
Okay,
So our site contacts are there and the location of the site.
Got it.
Yeah, and then they could put some of the key topics up there, like if you wanted to look at the OU2, you know, design, click here, and that makes it easier. But if somebody's looking for an older document that's not as recent, it's a little bit more difficult to find that.
And that's what I mean, so if, once you go to the search, once you go to the search engine, you're searching the entire EPA
Yes,
website.
right.
You're not searching
Right,
the
right.
Ringwood Superfund site.
Right,
Correct.
that's right. So that's also a good point.
Yeah.
Click, bang, yes, please, and then and I'll bring that back to them too, because that is a good point also.
It's like when you're in a Facebook page, you can search for something that's happened on that page. Like
Yeah,
within a
right,
group. Like if I'm in Ringwood Moms and I know somebody recommended a gardener, I can search gardener.
Right.
So it would be good if they could refine the search feature to only search within the Superfund site. Because I know I have this when I go to the New Jersey state website and I'm looking for one thing and the next thing I know, I have like 800 choices and none of them are what I want. They're not very refined search engines.
Well, Pat, if you could back up to the main page, I just have a question here. So under the announcements, the key topics, do you feed this in to the web gurus?
Yes, either Joe or I send them the documents and they upload them for us.
Could you ask that that top line be announcement, next meeting, date, location?
I certainly can, yes.
I mean-
And then we would take it off as we switch
Correct.
them out with the new ones.
Or,
Yeah.
or maybe that it would be a permanent next meeting as your first item and we just change the date.
That's what I'd like to see, because before it was under,
Yeah,
so, yeah. All right, no, I can ask them. Well, you know, I don't, will they do it? I don't know.
right.
And frankly, just have a calendar. So you can look ahead too.
You see,
Just
yeah.
have a meeting calendar.
And that could be the
Just
link, so if
date
you say
yeah.
next meeting, May date, and then you could have a link that says
And then calendar.
calendar.
And then they can see, you know, whatever.
Yes.
And you could put other important, if there's other important dates, like, you know, I don't know.
Like the presentation by
Well, we
New
get
Jersey,
Yeah.
by New York University.
Eventually we'll get to like public comment periods and stuff that will want to be on that. That'll be
Yeah.
Yeah,
important.
you'll see more on that as you get closer to the record of decision and the proposed plan of the groundwater, absolutely. Yeah, you know, that's good about.
But in one place, you know, in one place, just open it up to a calendar.
Where would my meeting materials be? If you wanted to find presentations, what would be your thought about that?
See, that should be. Public information department,
So let's see, what are the other headings?
it's probably here also.
Site documents and data, reports and
That's-
documents. So you might want,
Yeah, let's see, that would be under that.
Maybe we could ask for a heading that says meeting materials and takes you,
what you might want to do on each page, when you click on the page that's site documents and data, your menu is staying the same on the side, but once you're on the site documents and data, you really should have a menu for that page. Click on the site documents and data, like you have.
I have it there now, and I went under reports and
Yeah,
documents.
so
See, here's the
instead of
presentation.
seeing that, you have that same menu, but you don't have a menu for all of the subtopics that are within that page to make it easier to navigate that page. The
One
only
thing
way,
that-
the only way you can see what's on the page is to scroll through the whole page.
Or there's a search all columns too. See, I think that just shows what's on this page.
one thing that I've seen, Robin, and this has to do with the EPA, like national infrastructure for the website, that is if you keep the left-hand column fixed, you can add the right column for
Yeah.
searching that.
But what I'm saying is just click on that the site documents and data.
That's where I am now.
There was other stuff on that page, or
Go back one.
there was other stuff on that page.
No, I think it was
You do a bar at the top as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've got reports and documents, administrative records, site data, and nobody knows what's on that page unless they scroll through all of it.
Right.
And over time, the page is going to be growing. But if you took the headings for each of those subcategories and put a menu maybe at the top, and they,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, but then, you know, they're not going to revamp the whole
No.
system for us.
No.
No, they're not going to do it. Yeah.
But
You know, something
No,
is,
but it doesn't change their menu on the side. Their menu on the side stays.
I think, so one is, this is helpful, is that EPA has a structure. There's going to be comments
It's a
about it.
template. It's a template they use for
template.
everything. I understand.
What can you do within the template that makes it easier to work? And that's the key. My guess is that some of the headings that would make it easier to use would be more or less consistent across a variety of Superfund sites. There may be headings that are specific that would be useful for sorting information for Ringwood, and that's where the people who are using this information, it would be helpful to know. Because if they can just add a different bullet here to get you to where you need to be.
Maybe the thing to do, since they're not going to revamp it, so they probably would put the announcement.
I think that,
Yeah,
yeah,
they
I
would
could
do
just
that.
request that.
Or a
I don't
calendar
think
or
that's a
something,
problem at
maybe.
all. Right, right.
But maybe we need to have like a tutorial, like a little, say, this is what you need to do, like this, I don't know.
Almost like a user's guide.
Yeah, like how would
You
how
could-
can you get to the document you want to get to.
But you can't search, just
Yeah,
the document,
supposed
just
to be.
yeah, just the page.
Well, go up to the search feature and
Sometimes
let's
Joe will
see,
say,
if we
well,
search Ringwood landfill number 1, if that search feature will find it for us.
Landfill number, sign one.
Was it Ringwood then?
Yeah.
Just search Ringwood landfill and see what comes up. Let's see how focused their search engine is. There was a space in between, but yeah, you got it, okay. Let's see if it'll take us to those documents.
237 results.
Yeah, see, because it's not taking you to the headings, it's taking you to wherever,
To anything else that was
wherever
out
it
there.
shows up, yeah.
Right, right.
A user's guide. And getting
You can put it on our
information,
Facebook page.
Oh, wait a minute, it does have a little menu on the top. It just looks like this, everything else. They should box that. Here's your little menu. That's your little menu.
right.
It just looks like everything else,
Right, yeah.
so it doesn't stand out. Let them box that, so that it's the page menu.
Yeah.
Because that does jump you to, so if you
Yeah.
had, yeah, it does, but it
It doesn't stand out.
it doesn't stand out.
Yeah.
It just looks like everything else.
Just put it in a box on your site.
Yeah, box it.
Yeah.
All right, I'm sure actually they can do that. If you go to like site data, I suppose that's where you get to the.
Yeah, because it jumps you, because it does have, you can get back again from
Right.
within each section.
Right. Yeah.
This is kind of my wheelhouse, I used to do
Yeah.
this.
Okay, good.
All right, well,
Fun,
I have some
something I
good
know.
recommendations to take back, but I think the most important one is to put the date.
Yeah, now, Pat, did you want to say anything about other websites?
Well, this is our website. I mean, this is really the only one have that's dedicated totally to Ringwood.
No, but you were saying that there are some, I thought, so maybe I misunderstood, that there are other project websites that have a little more, or did I?
Well, what is Pompton Lakes? Does Pompton Lakes look exactly the same, but for Pompton Lakes?
Pompton Lakes is set up differently because it's not a Superfund site. It's a RCRA site. So they have a different template for that. I mean, it's the same information,
Right,
but
but,
it's in different places on that. But, you know, any other Superfund site within Region 2, assuming they've gotten through all of them to redo them, should be set up like this.
if they don't, they will.
They will. They're still working. I still get, you know, emails every day, okay, you can go to, you know, Piccadilly Arsenal now, and you'll find the document, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So under the website, the one thing I had is the meeting notice at the, first thing you see, that there may be a link to a calendar.
Yep.
See what
I'll
that
bring
is.
up with you.
That would show public comment periods, public, public meetings. That whether there's a user's guide, that's something that is not going to happen overnight, but
Right.
people could look at it, start to figure out, if you're looking for information, here's the type of things you'll
Right.
find in which places. And just a suggestion to box the guide on the site documents and data.
Now, the only other, I mean, not it's a webpage, but we do have a repository at the library here. And now, though, a lot of the documents that are on here, you won't find here in the library, because the documents that Joe sends here have to be documents that are part of the administrative record. They're also up there, right, Joe? All the administrative record documents are up there.
They're in the
But,
library.
yeah,
And
I mean, they're
on the
also
website.
online.
And on the website, so
Right,
yes,
yeah.
they'll pull up on the
Just
website. Go into
just
technical
click on one of the
documents.
other subcategories, health and environments. Let's see if it's the same template on each page. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's got that on this page, but it doesn't stand out.
Yeah.
If they just do that,
Well, they made it blue.
Yes, right.
no.
Well, it shows that
It
it's
might be
already
blue, because it's been
blue.
linked, it might be blue because somebody's clicked on it.
All links are blue.
Yeah, it's just because it's a link, because all the other links were blue too.
Yeah.
But I think just that on the page.
Specified.
Come on, one less trip for Scott Pruitt to Morocco, and we can afford to put a little car on it.
And then,
Yes.
Pat,
that's
what's
a-
so we've talked a little bit about the website say a little bit about what EPA is thinking in terms of the repository and how materials are being managed.
Yeah. Ideally, I think EPA would kind of like to phase out the repositories at the library. I don't think it'll happen for a while, because that's sometimes the only way that people have to look at the documents if they're not online and they want to come and see it. In the past, all our documents were, those 3 to 4 inch thick white binders that were, almost impossible to lift up. So what happens is, we take up so much space in the library, and after a while, they say, we just don't have room for you anymore. Well, a few years back, we started sending everybody the libraries and other repositories information on a disk, which is fine, and it's much easier. However, what we found is that a lot of times, believe it or not, people lift those CDs from the library, and then we don't see them again.
But in truth, if people have to go to the library to look at the hard copy, the library has internet access for people who don't have computers. So as long as they're in the library anyway, they can sit at a computer and look up all the same stuff anyway.
But some people like to take the disc home and look at it at their leisure, because they have computers at home, obviously, if they're taking the disc home to look at it,
Then they can access it
They
here.
can access it here too. I know
Yeah.
It's just,
We just don't live in a place where there are that many people that don't have access to the internet, and the library does, so
Right.
one way or the other, they would get it.
So I think eventually there's talk about, kind of phasing out these repositories a little more and more, but not right now. They'll still be keeping them the way it is. And Joe still sends all the administrative record documents here.
We can save some trees and put them
Well, no, the
in
administrative records.
put them in the
for
place where
laws
fix it up.
are, a lot of the newer documents are apply. I mean, if there's a request for those documents to be put in the library, you can, put them on CD and send them to the library. And hopefully they stay there.
And if you want to look at a web page for any other site, just Google it and put it in there.
Thing is, what's good about, when they have this library, and I don't think they have enough of it, is the historical documents.
Yeah.
What happened, like in 1984, or what happened in 1994, during the listing and the
First site,
delisting.
listed, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's on a borough website.
Not everything.
Money to it.
They don't have a way.
And I think that is a challenge for long-term projects overall, is you've got the interface before the internet. And
Yeah, because it's fascinating to see that, way back when they were talking about pump and treat, that was on the table, they decided they were going to watch and monitor, and, we're right at the exact same place now.
do the websites have places for archived materials?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Could there, because when you're saying that, it seems to me that there could be.
Well, everything could be available, except, all the old stuff would have to be digitized.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know,
Which if they're lengthy documents.
Yeah.
well, that's it, I don't know if there's a
It's
limit to
labor
how much
intensive.
information could be, on a webpage. I don't know if there's a limit to it, only so many megabytes.
It's more the historical, from going forward, from the digital age and everything, you can find everything.
Probably, that's, Robin's got her finger on the pulse, less about the capacity limits, it's more about the actual digitizing.
Right.
Does it exist in digital form at all?
Who has it, and B, what would it take to,
I mean, I know you have all the hard copies somewhere at the EPA, historical documents.
And capacity, I don't think is as much of an issue as it used to be. I understand there's a lot more capacity now.
right, for space?
Yeah, space, right. Right.
Well, documents don't take, if it's Word documents, PDFs, they don't take up that much
No.
space. Images, yes.
Yeah,
Stuff like that, it's infinitesimal compared to what capacity is now.
We have a couple sites that are in construction right now, and what we do is put pictures up on the webpage. And that really, obviously the picture, 1,000 words and all that, but it really does. If there's a picture on there with a little caption, what this is, and what it's doing, people seem to like that almost more than the written word sometimes.
In today's age, Oh, yeah, I don't want to
So
read
we
it.
can do the same thing here once we're in construction too. We can start putting pictures up.
Oh, so that during the construction phase,
Yeah, when they're out there actually doing the work.
is there, I think maybe there would be, I'm just gonna put a note down for that construction phase photo.
I mean,
Yeah, you don't have a lot of people that have the patience to read all these documents anyway.
Right.
So,
What happened
we have
to
to spoon feed.
Ken Patron tonight?
Ken said he would, I think he's on vacation. And I don't know, I
Ken
wanted
and
to,
Mark, they both,
they both said they couldn't make it. but I don't
He
know
talked
why.
so much last month, he just.
Yeah, he's exhausted.
He ran out of words.
But there was a question that Vivian wanted, maybe I could just email him, but we would like to know who the contact for the natural resource damages
Oh,
person would
right,
be.
that's right, I remember.
Okay, I actually wondered that question myself,
Yeah.
so I called.
Oh,
And who is it?
Okay, so I said,
Oh, great.
okay, so this is one of those off the cuff. I didn't come prepared to talk about this, but I was like, okay, I've been in processes where there's been a NERDAR, and I know what happens from the beginning. I said, how do you get into it? What is the entry point? And so, what I heard is that, like when there are oil spills, there is an oil spill notification, and it goes immediately, like Fish and Wildlife gets it, and they look at it. And one of the things about tripping a NERDAR is the likely scope of impact. So the feds get involved when a resource managed by the federal government is impacted. The one process that I was involved with was Duke Energy and the coal ash spill. So there is a coal ash release, and it affects fish, which is under the domain of the National Fish NIMS and part of NOAA. Once there are resources that an agency has a responsibility for, that's when they get involved. And I said, okay. And they said you could do an inquiry. So if you let me go back to my notes, they actually said, here's who you would contact and say, has anybody ever looked at whether this, that, or the other site should be considered for a NERDAR process? But one of the big pieces is the scope and level of exposure. And when there was that coal ash release, it affected 2 states. There's a lot of resources. And then once the agency says, yes, this is within our scope, this is something that we need to be looking at, then there's a lot of different pieces that come in. So for example, it's not just the fisheries, it's also recreation access and a lot of pieces that come in. The recreation doesn't get looked at though because somebody with recreation responsibility says we need to look at this. It comes in through the natural resources trigger. And then once they say yes, this meets a NERDAR process, that
So this is federally or
It's federal.
state?
now the state has its natural resource restoration process. That's what they're looking at for the wetlands, the NRR, that's what Ken was talking about last time. When the feds get involved, there are partnerships with other trustees. They identify trustees and say who needs to be involved as part of this discussion on this particular issue. And they bring in federal trustees and state trustees. And then you start going down the NERDAR process. And the NERDAR process is pretty well explained about how they do the natural resource damage assessment, the restoration is not mitigation and it's not cleanup, so it's above and beyond that. If you're doing something as cleanup, that doesn't count for the repair. If you're doing something as mitigation as part of your project, that doesn't count for the repair. So there's a very clear process, but my question was, well, how do you get into the process? And I'll email that and maybe attach it as just a little write-up. I called, I want to say the Northeast Regional Office for Fish and Wildlife. And there's someone that you could
Does it
contact.
kick in automatically on the Superfund side at all?
Right.
A natural resource?
Natural resource, I mean, there's a certain point where we do like notify trustees, in terms of like, if we're like negotiating an agreement to try to, with guarantees or something along those lines about that we do notify trustees, but that's about all.
Because I just was under the impression that we would have to be working with the state for what's going on at our Superfund site.
Because you're dealing with groundwater, which would be a state resource.
Yeah.
And that's a great example, is
Right.
that resource, there's not a federal agency with responsibility for it. And so
So
groundwater
Ken-
couldn't trip the federal radar.
So we need the state, and Ken needs to give us a name. Or,
But
I don't know.
if there's, but the federal trustees don't get involved unless there's a federal resource. And so Ken and Mark, my understanding, I am certainly not a specialist on this, they would be addressing that through the NRR process within the state.
Right,
Yes.
yes.
And
That's
then
what I
if
thought.
somebody has a question that says, well, I actually do think that there is a situation somewhere that the feds do have oversight, there is someone that you can call and say, has this ever been reviewed?
But not for groundwater.
Groundwater, basically, that
It's
would be a
for the
state, that would be a
state, right.
state resource, and I think Ken can discuss it.
Maybe as an example, I'll make up what I think I understand hypothetically, is there is NERDAR guidance regarding Superfund sites. Let's say that there's a Superfund site that actually has some critical habitat for, endangered species that clearly falls. If it was a big site and the impact was really significant, it probably would, trigger that type of activity. And again, this is just my understanding, but I'll give a little recap before I talk to you, because I wanted the
That'd be
same
great,
thing.
yeah.
Does anybody in the room have any comments or questions that they want to ask? Provide? Please, if you have names of people that you know would like to get information about public hearings, let us know, and we will be working on social media. Anybody else? Thank you. We're going to ask the CAG members to stay in for some administrative tasks regarding emails and mundane activities, but if you want to take a
The
break.
letters.
Oh, letters, go ahead.
Letters.
Explain the letters.
Okay, so we have 2 letters that we've drafted as a group. One to reach out to the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission that runs the reservoir to get their, basically to reach out to them as a stakeholder in the Superfund process here, because they, as the people controlling the reservoir, have an interest. And then the other 2, Peter Lopez, who is now the regional administrator in Region 2 of the EPA, which governs our area here. So to invite him to come and tour the site and become a little bit more familiar with that. So we've got those 2 letters we'd like to send out.
Maggie, you said you were going to send those out tomorrow?
Yes.
So remember that Lopez, we have to attach the New Jersey Native American report and the Jacobs report, but see, we're mailing it,
Right.
not emailing it, in
Could
which
we do
case,
both?
well,
Which is what I did to the governor, I emailed it to the governor.
yeah, because the letter
the
says it's
attachments.
attached. Because we can't, obviously we can't mail the Jacobs report.
No,
And I think the copies that are printed there are the ones that don't have the grammatical corrections that I made to our
Yeah.
legal document.
so I have a
So the
correct
printouts
letter,
and mail
yeah.
is correct.
So then we should email it with the
The attachments.
attachments.
Right.
But when we mail it,
There won't be enclosures.
No.
right. we won't-
You might, does the letter reference enclosures that have been sent via email?
We can do the correction of that. Yeah.
Yes,
We'll
or
just
just,
correct that.
or just put a note,
Yeah.
you know, sent via email.
For the commission, it's just, you know, they're very unto themselves, but just to sort of reach out and open maybe a line of communication. So, are we all on board with corrections, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Doug is and Vivian is, so just wanted to put that out there.
The next meeting, what does the group normally do for summer? Is there an expectation of meetings during the summer? Is that something we need to discuss?
We could discuss that, you know,
Okay.
tonight.
Okay.
Right, I was just gonna send you this link, should I send it to anybody else, DOH? Or you wanted to send it out to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send that right now.
So we'll make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Bliss.